The judge's gavel had barely struck when the unthinkable happened. A 3-year-old girl, barely tall enough to see over the stand, lifted her tiny hand and pointed toward the police K-9 sitting beside an officer. The room fell silent. Her grandmother whispered for her to sit, but the child's voice trembled through the courtroom. He knows, every head turned. The dog, a trained German shepherd named Rex, suddenly stood, eyes locked on the defendant across the room. His growl rolled through the air like thunder. "Control that dog," the man shouted, panic flashing across his face, but it was too late. Rex had already scented the truth, and what he was about to reveal would shatter every lie in that courtroom. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The small, peaceful town of Riverton was shaken to its core one chilly autumn evening. The call came in just after sunset, a panicked neighbor reporting screams from a nearby home. When officers arrived, they found chaos, shattered glass, overturned furniture, and a young woman unconscious on the floor. In the corner, clutching a stuffed bunny with trembling hands, sat her 3-year-old daughter, Sophie, her big brown eyes wide with silent terror. Detective Mark Daniels was assigned to the case, alongside his trusted K-9 partner Rex, a sharp, disciplined German shepherd known for his uncanny instincts. As they searched the house, Rex's nose twitched, pacing anxiously near the child, his ears low but his eyes soft. He sensed fear, confusion, and something unspoken. The only person who might know what happened was Sophie, but she hadn't said a single word since that night. Doctors said trauma had silenced her. The prime suspect, a friendly neighbor named Tom Willis, claimed he'd simply found the mother injured. Yet something about his story didn't sit right. Weeks later, as the case reached the courtroom, one truth became clear. The smallest witness and the quietest detective weren't human, and together, they were about to reveal what really happened that night. The day of the trial arrived under heavy gray skies. Inside the Riverton courthouse, the air was thick with tension. Reporters whispered from the back rows, cameras flashed discreetly, and townspeople filled every seat waiting for answers. At the front sat Tom Willis, the accused neighbor, his face pale, his hands clasped tightly on the table. Across from him, Detective Mark Daniels stood beside Rex, who sat tall and alert, his dark eyes scanning every movement in the room. Then the door opened, and a hush fell over the courtroom. Sophie, the little girl in a yellow dress, walked in holding her grandmother's hand. She looked so small, so fragile, that even the judge's stern expression softened. "She's only 3, the defense lawyer protested. "She can't possibly testify." But the prosecutor shook her head. "We're not here for words. We're here for truth." Sophie was gently lifted onto the witness chair, her bunny clutched tight. She looked around nervously, until her eyes landed on Rex. The dog's ears perked up, his tail giving one slow wag. That's when Sophie's lips parted. She lifted her tiny hand, pointed toward Rex, and whispered, "He knows." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward. No one could have predicted what would happen next. The courtroom froze. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved, and not even the judge. Then Rex suddenly stood up, his muscles tense, his gaze fixed on the defendant, Tom Willis. A low growl rumbled from his chest, deep and unrelenting. The little girl's hand was still pointing at him, her eyes wide but calm. "Control your dog," Tom shouted, pushing back from the table. But Detective Mark Daniels didn't move. He knew that look in Rex's eyes, and it wasn't aggression. It was certainty. Rex took a step forward, ears pinned back, nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The tension in the room thickened. Officers on standby exchanged uneasy glances. The judge hesitated but didn't interrupt. Something unseen was unfolding. "Easy, boy," Mark murmured. "Show me." Rex moved closer to Tom's desk and began circling it slowly. Then in one swift motion, he sat beside the defense table and barked, once sharp and commanding. Gasps filled the courtroom. Mark's instincts screamed to act. "Sir, please stand," he said, eyes narrowing. Tom hesitated, his hands shaking. When he finally rose, Rex lunged toward his jacket pocket, barking again. An officer reached in and pulled out a small gold locket. Inside was a photo of Sophie's mother. A stunned silence fell over the room. Sophie whispered almost inaudibly, "Mommy's necklace." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. The judge banged his gavel and gasps echoed across the room. But in the midst of it all, Tom Willis stood frozen, his face drained of color. The gold locket gleamed under the light, unmistakable evidence that he had been inside the house the night of the attack. Detective Mark Daniels approached slowly, voice steady. "You said you never entered the home, Tom. Then tell me, how did you get this?" Tom opened his mouth, but no words came out. Rex stood beside Mark, growling low, his eyes never leaving the trembling man. Finally, Tom cracked. His voice broke into a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt her." The confession poured out like a flood. He'd gone to the house that night to borrow money. An argument turned violent, panic took over, and in his haste to flee, he'd taken the wrong bag, one that held the locket. Sophie's grandmother wept silently. The judge leaned back, shaken. "This case is closed," he said softly. As officers handcuffed Tom, Rex walked over to Sophie, his tail swaying gently. She reached out her tiny hand and placed it on his head. "Good boy," she whispered, smiling faintly. For the first time since that night, the little girl who hadn't spoken finally did. In the days following the trial, the story spread like wildfire. Police dog solves case through child's testimony. But to Detective Mark Daniels, it wasn't about fame or headlines. It was about a little girl who found her voice again, and a loyal dog who never stopped listening. Each afternoon, Sophie and her grandmother began visiting the police station. The first time she walked in, clutching her stuffed bunny, Rex immediately trotted over, tail wagging. Sophie squealed in delight and hugged his neck tightly, whispering, "I missed you." From that moment, a bond formed that no trauma could break. Mark often watched them quietly from his desk. Sophie, once afraid of everyone, now laughed freely as she brushed Rex's fur. Sometimes she'd sit on the floor beside him, showing him her drawings on stick figures of her mom, and Rex with a golden medal around his neck. "She's healing because of him," her grandmother said softly one day. Mark nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "He doesn't need words to help," he replied. "Just a heart that listens." The department later started a program where Rex would comfort children during interviews or testimonies. And every time Sophie visited, she'd point at him proudly and whisper the same two words that had changed everything. "He knows." Months later, the Riverton Town Hall was packed to the doors. A banner hung across the stage, honoring courage and compassion. Cameras flashed as Officer Mark Daniels stepped forward with Rex by his side, the loyal K9 standing proudly, a small medal glinting around his neck. The mayor smiled warmly. "Today we honor a dog who not only solved a case but reminded us all that truth and innocence can come from the unlikeliest of voices." The audience erupted into applause. In the front row sat Sophie, wearing her yellow dress, her grandmother's hand resting gently on her shoulder. When the mayor invited her up, the crowd went silent. Sophie walked up shyly, clutching a small drawing in her hand. She reached Rex, smiled, and placed the drawing on his paw. It showed a little girl, a police officer, and a brave dog under the words, "My hero." Then, softly but clearly, she whispered, "Good boy." Rex wagged his tail and licked her cheek, earning a collective gasp and a few tears from the crowd. In that moment, everyone in the hall understood. Sometimes the truest heroes don't wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they simply have four paws and a heart that never stops believing.